All right, off to a good start. I just want to thank Tony and Nicolette and everyone for bringing us together. This is, I love these small meetings, and I really welcome, it's very appropriate for the work that I'm going to be talking about with Matt Bundick, to have an opportunity to talk about the translational implications of the work, because our project is headed in that direction from the very planning stage of the study. So the research that Matt and I will talk about is from a project that we're doing collaboratively with a San Francisco-based nonprofit called Encore.org. And this is a project that has three parts. And the first part is an academic study of purpose in later life, meaning age 50 and up, and with more emphasis on the 60s, 70s, and 80s than the 50s. In addition, the folks at Encore.org are doing a study of organizations that support the development of purpose beyond the self in older people. And then the third stage, built right into the grant as our final year, is a dissemination and application phase of the project. So really, this emphasis on translational implications is right on target for our project. Our partner institution, Encore.org, is, I'll read you their little mission statement. Their mission is to build a movement to tap the skills and experience of those in midlife and beyond to improve communities in the world. So our project overall, this three-part project, has a clear social change agenda. And so we are working at all stages with our partners to ask them, what do we need to understand better in order to not only help individuals find purpose at this stage of life and implement their purpose, but also, in a sense, to change the culture of aging, so that people think of this stage of life as an opportunity to contribute to the world, whether or not they've been purposeful beyond the self at earlier ages. So an important goal of the study is that the insights that it produces are going to be really useful to practitioners and other lay audiences. And those include a lot of different sectors. This includes organizations like Encore.org and their affiliates, geriatricians and other healthcare providers, life coaches, individuals themselves who are trying to sort out what they're doing with this stage of life, and it is a kind of transitional moment for people. Companies that are looking to support the transition of their employees to retirement in a positive way, and thought leaders, as I said, to try to think about how we can change the culture around what's expected of older people. And a study just recently came out affirming what we all know is the tremendous amount of ageism, and not only in the U.S., but actually pretty widespread internationally as well now. And I myself believe that one of the things that can push back against that is for older people to develop this capacity to contribute beyond the self and remain contributing, and for the culture to recognize that that's going on and that that's an appropriate way to think about this age. So I'll say just a little bit about our what we call study one, which is the sort of academic study in this, the research study. And then I'll turn it over to Matt. He'll talk about our survey data that we have, and then I'll come back and tell you a little bit about the in-depth interviews. So the study includes a national survey in the United States of 1,200 men and women, and it's meant to be as close to nationally representative as they could make it. We had Qualtrics, which has a panel firm, collect the data, and they did it using a questionnaire that we had developed and that we had piloted previously. And we also established some of the demographics ahead of time. So they have ways of doing it so that it was represented, as close to representative as it could be. One of the questions in the survey was whether people were willing to take part in an hour-long in-depth telephone interview after the survey, and we had an amazingly high rate of people who said they would like to do that. And so then we chose interviewees. We had 102 interviewees, and they were chosen primarily to get a range of purpose, which we took in a crude first stab from the survey results that had just come in, and then also a range of all kinds of demographics. And we were, I think, very successful in getting a diverse interview sample. So that's all I'm going to say. Before I turn it over, though, I just want to acknowledge another person that's very central to the project who's here and isn't going to be speaking today, Katie Remington. Raise your hand, Katie, who's just been working her butt off on getting the survey data analyzed along with Matt. And of course, Matt has been extremely important in the project. And Heather Malin, we're lucky enough to have her long experience with purpose contributing to it. And of course, Bill Damon's wisdom at all stages of the project. So that's who we are and what we're doing. And Matt will tell you about the survey, and then I'll come back and say a little bit about the interviews.
Thank you. Great. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak about this really quite large and I think wide-ranging approach that we've been taking on with generous funding from the Templeton Foundation. Thank you. What I'd like to talk about regarding the survey, following Anne's lead in, are a handful of things, any one of which I could spend my whole time on, but I only have about 15 minutes, so I'm going to try to stay fairly brief on each. How we put together the survey, what it looks like, which Anne already talked a bit about, and how we went about operationalizing purpose using the survey data, which many in this room know is a real challenge. Getting that right, getting it right in ways that are in fidelity to the multidimensional nature of Bill and Kendall and Jenny Menon Mariano's definition of purpose. Then I'll share some of the relevant survey findings. The project is still in progress, and so we're still working on some different ways of viewing some of the survey analyses we're doing, but as they pertain to what we want to do here and talk about in relation to well-being and health in particular, we'll share some demographic differences in purpose, relations with the well-being indicators that we included on the survey. In particular, we wanted to talk a little bit about how our respondents think about their priorities in the so-called Encore years, especially given that a lot of the focus here is and should be on younger people. Since we are one of the couple of presenters that are focusing on people later in life, we wanted to share some of our data on that. And purpose and self-reported health. We did not set out as part of the project to really focus on self-reported health, but clearly this gathering is interested in that. So we have an item that we're using to try to at least start to dig into how purpose and self-reported health are related. And then I'll just share, if there's some time, a summary of the major takeaways from the survey analyses, and then hand it back over to Anne, who will talk more about some of what we're finding in the interviews so far. So quickly, the content structure of the survey, you'll see going around. The handout, I was really intentional about putting together so that I didn't have too much verbiage on each slide, and I'll be interacting with the handout as we go. In particular around what these items and measures look like. If you have any questions about specifics, such as Chromebox alphas on the scales or anything like that, we can come back to those later. Demographic items, just put them all down on the handout, and you can see the statistics bear out in ways that and described are intended to be roughly nationally representative. That's not exactly perfect, but the age range, just so you all are aware, we went from ages 50 all the way up to 92 was our oldest respondent, but the mean age was in the early 60s. Our income was not far from the median income for the United States. The race-ethnic breakdown, roughly representative of this age group. We asked about marital status and had almost an even split between married, partnered in some form versus not married. So the demographic characteristics allowed us to look at some of the different breakdowns in terms of purpose and some other items, and then we were also able to control for those in ways that are important, especially when people think about factors such as income, that a lot of people believe are important when we think about purpose, and we're going to have some results to reflect on that too. With regard to the purpose-related measures, if you look down to the left and further down to the bottom, our purpose assessment actually looks very similar to, and we based it on, the work that Bill and Heather have been doing with their study, but in ways that are also somewhat different. I'm going to speak about that in a little bit more detail. But just so you see, we asked the respondents to both rate and rank a list of 10 life goals. Those 10 life goals are listed in the bottom left. Much like with what Heather described in their study, there are 5 beyond the self, or at least what we intended to be beyond the self life goals, and 5 more self-oriented life goals. I'll talk a little bit more how we arrived at those as well a little bit later. And then we also asked some questions about, broadly speaking, how people are engaged currently and intend to be in the future, the ways in which they derive meaning from, or to what degree people find these life goals reflect who they are as a person. Those are the stems in the bottom right. And again, I'm not going to go into each of those in detail right now, but I'll come back to those in a moment. I just want you to see what's actually on the survey. We also asked about perceived barriers or anticipated barriers to pursuing life goals, which you'll see in the upper right. These were items that were particularly important to our partners at Encore.org in ways that would help them and help us in our collaboration try to understand how do we get through to people who see that they may have some germ, some interest in, but maybe don't see an avenue toward enacting their purpose. Again, I'll share some data on this as well and how we arrived at these items. And then I mentioned before the priorities for the Encore years. If you flip to the back on the right side, you'll see the list of the priorities that we asked about. There are 8 of them, and I'll share some data on those as well. And then you'll see we were intentional about including a number of purpose-related measures that have been traditionally used. And I can promise you that we had no idea that Pat Hill and Carol Riff would be at this conference before we decided to use their measures. Among a number of other measures that actually aren't germane to what we're talking about today, but those were 2 of the primary purpose measures. They were the 2 primary purpose established measures we used. Pat Hill and his crew, who put theirs together very recently, were more focused on emerging adulthood, but we believe it applied nicely actually to our sample as well. And then we talked last night a bit about what Carol did with her measure. And then we have a couple of others that were intended to get at the beyond the self side of purpose in terms of prosocialness, and Shalom Schwartz's measure, Portrait Values Questionnaire, specifically the self-transcendence scale. And again, I'll share some data on how these were used. We include a number of well-being scales. Some of them overlap with the ones that Heather described from their study. And I won't go into the details on all of these, but they're all well-established measures, and the psychometrics on them are all really solid, and they were in our sample as well. And we included one item for self-reported health. It is, on your sheet, if you look in the sort of bottom left on the back, the specific wording of that item, and it's the only one we had that gets at health specifically, is which of the following describes your assessment of your health. And we use that in a couple different ways, and again, we think it provides at least preliminary insights on some interrelations among health and purpose and a few other things. So with regard to the procedure and the sample, Anne already gave you pretty much a heads up on this. The pilot testing we did was fairly extensive. We used MTurk, we got a few hundred people. We engaged in a number of focus groups and interviews in ways that we tried as best we could to reflect what what people later in life were directly telling us were their priorities and how they think about their life goals. And we use that information to inform the items that you see on this sheet for these different categories. Some of the items that we use were informed by previous work we've done or the work that Bill and Heather were describing from their project as well. But we did try to capture what people were telling us in terms of their priorities and their life goals and so forth. Anne already mentioned how we work with Qualtrics, and you saw the statistics that are roughly national representative. Almost 1,200 people, we had to drop a couple due to invalid data. So the survey operationalization of purpose, I really could talk about this for the rest of my time. I'm going to try not to. It is a challenge to try to, as many of you know, to try to capture, in the ways that Bill described earlier, is an inherently multidimensional construct in a unidimensional scale. It's almost impossible to do it in ways that actually can be continuous and inform the types of analyses a lot of times we like to try to do. And so we took a little bit of a different approach, which was ultimately with the intent to try to categorize people as having purpose or not having purpose in a just straight up dichotomous way, and recognizing those who do not have purpose would come in a number of subforms, not unlike what Heather was referring to earlier, where they may have some sort of life goal that may be beyond the self, but they're not acting on it. They may have some sort of self-oriented life goal that they're acting on, but they're missing this beyond the self component. What we were focused on, and the only thing I'll really talk about in any detail here, is that determination of purpose for participants on the survey, as informed by both what we used as these, as I mentioned before, these items on the survey around life goals, the types of life goals, how they rated and ranked them, and how they talked about the life goals that they rated highly and ranked highly as being engaged in some sort of regular activity involvement, intent to continue to engage in, degree to which it's meaningful to them. And again, these are some of the items that are on your sheet. So I do want to give a little bit of insight into this. Before we go to the slide where I'll tell you how we ultimately got to a determination using the survey data as having purpose or not having purpose, we'll come on the next slide. I do want to note that we did this not only in ways that were guided by a sense of the types of things that go into that mix, which again, Bill and Heather's work was instrumental toward in the Youth Purpose Project of many years ago, of which I was a part. We worked very hard to try to get the survey to operationalize purpose. We had an opportunity here, which was pretty unique and we think has served us well, to, in parallel, be working on the operationalization of purpose using the survey data and the items that we set up for that purpose of getting to a determination of purpose or non-purpose, in sort of conversation with the interview coding that Anne was noting was going on with the 102 interviewees, that as the interviews were being coded in batches, we could take the batches that had an interview determination of purpose by way of some of the things Anne will talk in more detail about in her presentation, of what was asked about, similar to what Heather described, around what are you driven by? Do you have a goal that's intended to impact the world? Is it beyond yourself? Is the reason for that something that is beyond the self? Are you currently acting in some way? Do you have some intent to continue to act toward that life goal? Is it central to who you are? So there was an intentional alignment between the interview protocol questions and the survey questions in ways that as the interviewees were being coded, we could take the interviewees' data on the survey and see, is what we're trying to get at with the survey items we have aligning with what's happening in the interview coding. And so we had this sort of almost back and forth process where we would have a batch of 25 interviewees who were coded for purpose. And at this point, just purpose versus non-purpose, not any of the sort of subforms of purpose. Purpose versus non-purpose. And do those align with what we are doing with the process of ratings and rankings of the importance of the life goals, BTS versus self? the engagement items, the meaningful items, the identity items about the life goals. Again, similar to, but not quite the same as what Heather was describing. And then see how much alignment do we have. And see the next time around when we have a new batch of 25 interviewees, we take those and tweak sort of the algorithm that we were coming up with along the way for how we were using the life goals questions and the engagement questions, et cetera. And so we feel good about having this sort of interplay that I'm calling a decision tree. We've used the word algorithm, which is sort of technically, mathematical. What we ended up effectively doing was establishing, is there in fact a life goal that we could say might be like a driver, right now independent of what the content of that life goal is. And we arrived at that by saying it's at least very important on a scale of 1 to 5, very important meaning 4, extremely important 5, and ranked in the top 3. So that gets sort of people on the map saying they have some sort of goal that could conceivably be a purposeful goal. From there, we took the list of the 5 items that I mentioned before that were beyond the self-oriented and said, is any of those ranked top 3 and at least very important goals a beyond the self goal? We also had a little messiness around the spirituality goal. If you could see on the front page, pursue my spiritual goals in the bottom left, because we came to recognize through the interviews that sometimes spiritual goals were actually more kind of self-oriented. I want to get to heaven, or it's really about me. And so just very briefly, I'll say we counted spirituality goals as beyond the self when they were included with 1 or more other top 3 ranked beyond the self goals. But I can elaborate on that later if you'd like. And then under goal attributes, we considered them to have a beyond the self goal that was, and we're just using the umbrella term, engaged, and therefore as having purpose if they met the cutoffs that we arrived at by way of this sort of iterative process going back and forth from the interviews. And I don't want to go into the detail about this now because it gets a little complex, but we drew cutoffs on the averages of some of these scales of 3.65 to 4 on 1 to 5 scales. And again, I can elaborate on that if you would like. This ultimately got us to a point where we could, across the interviewees that we have, using their survey data, an 80% match on the categorization of purpose versus non-purpose. And that's what we used to inform the algorithm that we then applied to the remaining roughly 1,100 survey participants. Is that all relatively clear? Because it wasn't to us for a long time, but we got there, and it was quite a process. So in the very limited remaining time, I just want to share some of what we found, again, looking strictly at purpose versus non-purpose. So the percentage of people in our overall sample, again, leaving out some people who are a little messy because of the spirituality piece, 31% of them have purpose. One of the reasons we included these purpose-related scales was to do a check to make sure that the people who we identified as having purpose actually have some of what the literature would suggest around these existing surveys. I'm not going to go into all the numbers. The main point is every one of them with relatively strong effect sizes show that the means for purpose, the participants who were designated as having purpose, were much higher than, statistically higher than, with pretty strong effect sizes, those who were determined not to have purpose. I'm going to breeze through a little bit of this, just want to make sure you know that the validity check sort of passed. We ask, and this is just descriptive, what are some of the most highest perceived anticipated barriers to pursuing life goals? And of all the ones on the sheet that you have, you'll see health problems was actually at the top of the list, and financial needs right alongside it. Lack of like-minded people, which Encore is really interested in. That means you can help get people together. Things like absence of opportunities, we can provide opportunities. So we get a sense here, and Encore has been, we've been working with them to try to help understand how that informs real practical applications. I'm just going to briefly mention demographic differences because actually there weren't many. And I know these are data you guys would love to dig into. I'm not going to go into many specifics, but with regard to age, t-tests showed that there were no mean differences between purpose and non-purpose. I broke it down into age groups, and there were still no differences in a chi-squared. The gender differences were there, but quite frankly, really small. And it's such a large sample that this effect size was pretty small. And actually, I tried controlling for prosociality, and the effect went away totally. Race, ethnicity was the one that I do want to mention really quickly. And again, I'm getting kind of short on time, so I'll only mention this briefly. Income was not a factor, education level ultimately not really a factor, and marital status not a factor. But race, ethnicity is a theme that seems to keep coming up, and we don't have answers to this right now because the data are still moving along. Whites and Asians, the percentage of people with purpose, were considerably lower than African Americans, Hispanic, Native Americans, and multiracial participants, and very notably. So again, I think there's a bit of a theme across a number of presentations. This slide, I'd love to talk more about. What we did is broke all 8 of the types of priorities into a list to see if we compared those who have purpose versus those who don't have purpose. Would there be differences given that some of these are more self-oriented and some are more beyond the self-oriented? Please ignore the error bars because they're not quite set up right. But if you just look, and probably all you can do is squint from back there anyway, what you see is people with purpose who are in blue consistently are higher than people not in purpose, even including the items that are a little bit more self-oriented. And our take-home message from this is people need not engage in sort of a zero-sum game around the ways in which they invest in their priorities later in life. They can both be engaged in self-oriented and beyond the self-oriented priorities and activities. And then at the end of this, because again, I don't want to go too much over my time, which I think I already have, probably not surprisingly, you'll see controlling for all the demographics, that purpose is related to every one of the well-being indicators, mostly small to moderate effect sizes, but also very statistically significant. And then when we get to purpose and self-reported health, no meaningful difference. And these are just percentages broken down by a split on the health scale. One small thing we did look a little bit further into, breaking this further down by age, we actually find if you look at the younger part of our sample, of those who have purpose in this red box, those who have purpose in the younger part of the sample have a lower mean on self-reported health than the other 4 groups, and statistically lower than those who have purpose and are older in the sample, and those who don't have purpose and are younger in the sample. And that's interesting when you think about it. It's actually potentially somewhat problematic toward health to not have, or to have purpose earlier in our age sample. So we still have to sort some of this stuff out, but these are pretty new findings. And then finally, just the last thing that we looked at, because we recognize health and well-being, as many of you know, is an important relationship that lower health usually predict lower well-being, and we found that in our sample just looking at keeping purpose out of it. Might purpose moderate? Might it function as a protective factor against the negative effects of poor health on reduced well-being? And we found that for life satisfaction and gratitude, that was in fact the case, where people who are higher in purpose, basically, purpose functions as a protective factor against poor health toward reduced life satisfaction and against poor health and reduced gratitude. So I'm not going to go through major takeaways. I'm already a couple minutes over, and I'm sorry about that. But I'll leave these up here. And as Anne comes up, if you want to take those in. And happy to answer any questions, because I'm sure you'll have them when Anne's done with her part. Excuse me.
I'll try to be brief so that we'll have some time for questions. So I wanted to talk about the interviews. As Matt said, we did the interviews in part as a way to ensure the validity of our survey measure, which we then used on a large group of people, but also to understand in a much more textured way what purpose in people this age really looks like and how it fits into the context of their lives more generally. So when we coded for purpose in the interviews, I want to make clear it was a little bit ambiguous that we did not know their survey purpose score when we coded, when we did the interviews or coded the interviews for purpose. And we just used these smaller, what we call, and I call them construction samples, to tinker with the algorithm based on what we knew. They better come out purposeful on the survey if they're clearly purposeful on the interview, in our opinion. And so we used a subset to do that before we actually, and then we were able to look at to what extent in the remaining cases that hadn't been contaminated that way, they line up with the survey, and they do. I think the assumption there that I'm obviously making, but I just want to point it out, is that I actually believe the interview data in general more than I believe the survey data on just about any study. And that's because these are long, probing interviews where, in a way, one way to put it is we don't let people get away with anything. So they can't misrepresent themselves because we're asking them to tell us more, give me examples, and so on. But we also do the interviews in a spirit of, well, I think it's fair to say love and lack of judgment and wish to really understand you. And the people who took part in these interviews absolutely loved it. They found it to be one of the most moving experiences they'd had in a really long time. So when we coded for purpose, as I think we've talked about coding for purpose in the interviews a few times, I just want to emphasize that we had a pretty high bar for what would count as purpose. Matt mentioned that their beyond the self goal had to be a driver. What we meant by that was that it didn't have to be the only really, really important thing in their life, but it had to clearly be a really, really important thing in their life. So, in a sense, they would bring it up frequently, they would bring it up spontaneously, they would relate other things to it, and so on. So, when we say that people are purposeful in the interview, it's quite striking. So, the prevalence of purpose in the interview sample isn't really that interesting because we picked the sample to have a distribution, have enough people who are purposeful that we, would be able to look at it. And then, of course, that was sent to the person who had the list of ID numbers, and we lined them up for interviews, but we didn't know which was which. So it turns out there were about 40% after we finished coding the interviews turned out to be purposeful, which is about what we had wanted in the group. We're trying to understand from the interviews, we're trying to understand not just the people that are purposeful, but the people who are not purposeful beyond the self. First of all, where are the sources of apparent well-being for them? And what kind of glimmers, this is the translational goal that we had, what are the glimmers of purpose that we might be able to build on, practitioners could build on to draw them into purpose, and also the, what they saw as the barriers and maybe some misconceptions that non-purposeful people might have about purposeful commitment that practitioners could potentially use to help educate people about, the rewards of purpose in later life. So in the interviews, we were interested in not just the sort of abstract, I forget exactly what the items are, you have them on your handout, contribute to fixing a problem in the world or help others and so on. But we wanted to know specifically what their purpose was. And so I thought I'd give you a little sense of the content of that. The top 5 mentioned categories were contribute to the local community in some way, things that had to do with politics, local or national. A very popular one was animals, animal rights and so on, and a love and care for animals. Issues connected with religion. And some people, though it was very much a minority, had a general sense of wanting to give back or do something for others. Other areas that were mentioned had to do with poverty, education, human rights, health-related issues and organizations, the needs of older people, the environment, the arts, and doing things for veterans. So you can see it was hugely diverse. I think what I'm taking away from that is that though some people think about the area of purpose that they're involved in as giving back in a general sense, the great majority don't. And the issues that they're committed to are usually quite specific, although some people may have more than one. And they're things that come out often of their own experience and their own, either their own problematic experiences in their lives earlier, or their positive experiences of getting a dog from the shelter and so on, that kind of thing. We are coding, we've already coded all the interviews for purpose. We are now working on coding them for lots of other things, including one of the questions on the interview is, do you have a sense of awareness of your own mortality? And if so, does that make any difference to how you're living your life? And so we have gone through all of the interviews and picked out the material from that question and in vivo, and we're going to go back and develop coding scheme. My impression is that most people, I was surprised to see most people say, I don't really, it's kind of a negative thing, I don't think about it, and I'm proud to say it doesn't affect my life. That was surprising to me because I think about mortality pretty much all day, every day, and it affects my life very much, I would say more than anything else, in a positive way. So that was interesting to me. As Matt said, and he didn't dwell on it, but the absence of some kinds of demographic differences in purpose was of particular interest to me, because Encore.org and organizations like that have tended to focus on middle class and more affluent people and helping to foster their purpose and so on. But we found, and our interview sample was extremely diverse, people in really, truly dire poverty, dire situations, all the way up to really relatively well-off people. And the finding that it doesn't really make any difference and that you could equally well, almost equally well, be purposeful when you are very low income and have many kinds of challenges and difficulties in life, as if in the cases of the people that are more affluent. And to me, that is one of our big takeaways, and it's something that actually Carol talked about last night too. But I don't think it goes without saying for people who hear about purpose and they don't know much about it. So I'd say our very first simple message is that purpose beyond the self is accessible to people from all backgrounds, all economic levels, work, health status, and so on. And this is so even for lives that are really, truly very, very difficult. The other message that Matt mentioned that came out of the survey data, I think, but also was very, very much confirmed in the interview analyses of purpose that we did, was that the relationship, how purposeful people think about the relationship between personal or self-related goals and beyond the self-related goals are very distinctly different. And that bar graph that you looked at, and you can see the priorities for the Encore years on the back sheet of your thing, but spend time with my family, have fun, take care of myself, and so on, all those self-related goals, which are good things. And the beyond the self-related goals, we did kind of expect that the the non-purposeful people would rate the self ones higher, and the purposeful people would not rate them as high, but it isn't. The purposeful people rate them all higher. And I think one of the things that I'm seeing in the interviews that has to do with the same issue of it just not seen as a zero-sum game is that purposeful people gain all kinds of satisfaction from their purposeful engagements. Not only in a sense, the moral satisfaction of contributing to the welfare of other people, but just plain fun and positive relationships and a sense of engagement and all kinds of things that are elements of eudaimonic well-being, but also a lot of things that are you'd think of as plain old hedonic well-being, and I'll get to an example of that. As Matt said, we didn't set out to look at health and purpose, but it was striking that among the people that rated their health as fair or poor, they were only just slightly less likely to be purposeful beyond the self than the people who rated their health good, excellent, very good or excellent. And this was borne out in the interviews as well, because a lot of people, if you interview older people for an hour and ask them what's important to them, you're going to hear a lot about health. And for a lot of these people, we heard a lot about health problems. And so we were able also to look at the extent to which the people who rated their health as 1 or 2, poor or fair, actually had talked about having significant health problems in the interviews. And basically, yeah, they did. I thought that it might be useful to just give you 2 examples of people who were highly purposeful, but who rated their health as fair. Just so that's 2 on our 5-point scale. And I'd say very few people, some people with terminal illnesses, rated their health as fair rather than poor. So who knows what that means? I'm sure there are people here who do know what that means. I'm not one of them. So I'm going to tell you about 2 people. I'll just tell you about 2 people, and then basically I'll wind up. The first one is a 74-year-old man. He identified himself at the outset of the interview as disabled and a retired veteran. I'm going to call him Darcy. He's a devout Christian, and he is 1/4 American Indian, and both of those are very important aspects of his identity. Darcy grew up poor, and he said he got into a lot of trouble when he was a teenager. And so he wanted to escape that life, and he joined the Navy at quite an early age, and ended up staying in the military as a career, becoming an officer, getting some education, and advancing over time. He didn't leave the military until he reached the military retirement age, which isn't that old. But during his early years in the military, he had a religious conversion, saying that he was influenced by some key people that he had met and books he had read, some Bible stories, especially the story of the Good Samaritan. And he said he's in a very happy, supportive marriage, which has been going on for 49 years by the time I interviewed him. And he had a grown son and a daughter, both of whom are flourishing. And our first interview question that we asked everyone is, what are some things that are really important to you at this point in your life? In response, Darcy listed 3 things. He said, my family, my health, and serving others. So I'm just going to talk about the serving others now. He said that a couple of decades earlier, he and some other retired veterans got together to try to start a little organization to assist veterans who were having trouble after leaving the military. And that went well, and actually it ended up growing into a much larger organization, a nonprofit, that provides international aid for people in disasters and chronic issues needing aid, and within the United States and internationally. He's the unpaid leader of that organization, director. And then he also has gotten involved with Indian tribes. He lives in Florida. He's gotten involved in Indian tribes around there and worked with the Mayo Clinic branch in Jacksonville to set up a program that does needs assessments regarding health in the Native American communities in Southeast United States, and also to work with them to train recruit and train community health workers who would be especially good at working with Native American communities. He's worked with adolescents in mobilizing them in an anti-smoking campaign and served as a volunteer chaplain in an auxiliary to the Air Force. So he's done a lot of stuff. Throughout the interview, he talked about how joyful his life is and how much pleasure he gets from his social service work. I'll quote him. He said, "The best way to have real joy in life is to give, to help others, whether you give yourself or give financially. Try to do what you can to help each other. I've spent most of my life helping others and trying to make a difference in the lives of people individually or collectively." When I asked him what this work means to him, he said, "There's nothing I like better than pecan pie with vanilla ice cream on it. So to me, that would be the equivalency of satisfaction. It's just you give me the joy of serving others or pecan pie with ice cream on it, and it's probably about the same." And then he laughed. He laughed a lot. Later in the interview, one of our standard questions is, "Do you think this current stage of life that you're in now is special or different?" His answer again stressed the enjoyment that he gets out of his life. He said, "I think it's probably the most enjoyable period of my life. If there is such a thing as a pinnacle, I feel like I'm on it." He's sick and 74 years old, so, okay. Our interview doesn't ask for details about health issues, and he didn't focus a lot of attention on his health problems during the interview, but he clearly has severe mobility limitations, and he also has quite severe diabetes, I think. And he said his health is a priority, and he's working to try to improve it, but that, there's only so much that can be done about some of these issues. And so he did cite health as a barrier. Matt showed that lots of people cite health as a barrier to purpose. As it turns out, lots of those people are purposeful anyway. So what did they mean when they cited health as a barrier? We spent a couple weeks trying to sort that out, and it's way too messy for me to tell you about. But basically, I think a lot of them meant I have to make accommodations. And he said the reason he was able to lead these organizations with the health issues that he has is he can do most of it from home, on the internet, online, and using technology and so on. But he does travel. He's a leader, and so he travels at least in the local region, both on the Native American stuff and also on his nonprofit. So I think what he meant by that is health is a barrier, but he's highly purposeful, is that it required him to make accommodations. It doesn't, when they cite health as a barrier to purpose, necessarily mean, in many cases it does not mean I can't be purposeful as I would wish to be because of my health. Sometimes it gets that bad, but for a lot of people it didn't. Okay, I'm going to give you one more case. This is a woman, also 74 years old. I'm going to call her Maria. She is, in her inimitable style, she describes herself as Mexican, fat, and a lesbian. She's clearly a character, and she used profanity throughout the interview more than anyone else in the study. She does it in a much more charming way. Oh, I shouldn't let my political. In any case, probably connected with being overweight. She has significant mobility problems too, like Darcy, and she said that her knees had given out, and as she put it, can't hold my fat body up anymore. Like Darcy, she rated her health a 2 on the survey. In response to our first interview question, as you recall, what are some things that are important to you? She said, well, that I have something to look forward to, that I feel like I'm still accomplishing good things in life. I mean by that things that are positive, that I'm still able to give and to create and to participate. And she certainly does participate. Maria works almost full-time as a volunteer caseworker for a nonprofit that aims to get homeless people, addicts, and others in dire trouble onto a better track. She also volunteers a lot with a local cultural organization that does programming around Southern California history, and she is involved with a lot of Latino cultural events in the communities, like Cinco de Mayo celebrations and so on. Despite being tart and tough talking, Maria expresses the same kind of joy that we saw in Darcy. We asked her about the challenges that she faced in volunteering as a caseworker, and she said, "I think there are times when there's sadness, and it's tiring work, I have to tell you, and it is stressful work. I won't lie about that. But I'm going to tell you right now, when someone starts getting it right, and you start watching that change and them taking on the responsibility of their lives and trying new things, that's unbelievable. Just the feeling, the excitement, it's just incredible, incredible experience to be, for me at least, to be there, to watch this person week by week, month by month. All of a sudden they're paying their bills, they've got a job, they're taking their meds, little stuff, but it's what they never did before. And you watch that growth and it's just phenomenal. That's my reward. And I didn't do it, they did it. These cases of fair health and robust purpose are quite prevalent in our study. I could go on basically the whole day with examples like this. In fact, some of our really purposeful interviewees, as purposeful as these two, were terminally ill, if you can believe that. Others who had been laid low by not only severe health problems, but also mental health and financial problems, maintained at least what we call a sub-threshold BTS engagement, beyond the self engagement. They were not fully purposeful in the sense of how much they were able to engage, but they were doing a lot anyway. And invariably, they talked about these beyond the self engagements as being the bright spots in their otherwise very, very difficult and terrible, difficult lives. In addition, it wasn't unusual for respondents with serious health problems and other debilitating issues such as grief or losing a spouse or clinical depression, that kind of thing, to say that their engagements beyond the self were a source of positive changes in their health, mental health, or health-related behaviors. The changes they cited included stress reduction, coping with grief, increased motivation for improving their exercise, diet, and substance abuse issues, and finding new sources of meaning in very, very hard lives, which were filled with overwhelming problems. And so a lot of people here in this room, and the great talk we had last night, talk about how purpose in life can contribute to better health. And I think we are seeing some of that in our cases. But I think we also have another message, which is, I believe it, that purpose in life can contribute to better health. But let's face it, you're not going to stay in perfect health for your whole life. So I think we have another really powerful message coming out of this study, which is that poor health does not need to stop you from being purposeful beyond the self. And if it doesn't stop you because you're so committed and you get so much out of it and you give so much to it, your life is a whole lot better, and in spite of whatever health problems you might have. Okay, thanks a lot, and we'll take questions.